I want to welcome all of you to our 9th Hilda B. Silverman Lecture, which is the first one we are holding in person since before COVID. Sorry. This is a devastating and heart-wrenching moment for Palestinians and Israelis, and one that deeply affects all of us. And while we may differ in our views, we are all in pain. I hope that as this lecture proceeds, we can engage each other with the care, respect, and civility that Hilda embraced in all of her work. I often wish she was with us, but most especially at this critical juncture for Israelis and Palestinians, two peoples to whom she was deeply devoted. Our speaker was someone Hilda greatly admired. In fact, when I inherited all of Hilda's papers, I found among them many of Amira Haas's writings with Hilda's signature comments written throughout all the margins. I cannot possibly do justice to Amira Haas's impressive resume. And she also asked me to keep this introduction very brief. I shall begin, though, by welcoming her back to Harvard, where she was a Religion, Conflict, and Peace Initiative Fellow at the Harvard Divinity School between 2019 and 2020. Not the best year to be here as the pandemic descended upon the campus. Amira Haas was born in Jerusalem and educated at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, where she studied the history of Nazism and the European left's relation to the Holocaust. She is the Haaretz correspondent for the occupied territories, where she has lived for 30 years as the only Jewish Israeli journalist. Amira Haas joined Haaretz in 1989 and began reporting from the West Bank and Gaza in 1991. In 1993, she moved to the Gaza Strip, then under direct Israeli military occupation, where she lived for 3 years. Since 1997, she has lived in Ramallah. As part of her extensive work for Haaretz, Amira Haas was the first to identify and examine closure as a long-standing policy of fragmentation. She was the first to argue that the division of the West Bank into areas A, B, and C established a dangerous precedent, threatening a viable Palestinian state, and the first Israeli journalist to warn that the Oslo process was not about peace. In addition to her extensive journalism portfolio, Amira is an accomplished author. Her book, Drinking the Sea at Gaza, Days and Nights in a Land Under Siege, is an account of her 3-year period living in Gaza. This book tells the history, plight, and struggles of Gazans since 1948, and especially after Israel occupied Gaza in 1967. First published in Hebrew and subsequently in English, the book has also been translated into several languages. Her other books include Reporting from Ramallah, An Israeli Journalist in the Occupied Land, and Diary of Bergen-Belsen, 1944 to 1945, which is based on her mother, Hannah Levi Haas's 1946 memoir. Amira Haas has been the recipient of several awards, and she insisted that I not list all of them. But I want to state 2 that speak to her brilliance and her courage. The World Press Freedom Hero Award from the International Press Institute and the Bruno Kreisky Human Rights Award. So please join me in welcoming her.
Last Tuesday, a Palestinian BDS activist commented in writing on my recent op-ed, and added that he hoped my loved ones were safe. I told him that I did not have relatives in the towns and kibbutzim around the Gaza Strip, but I knew some people there. And I know of some anti-occupation activists, Israeli activists, or relatives of activists, who lived there and who were killed by Hamas or taken hostage, as some extremely disturbing footage and testimonies tell. I also told him that my relatives with whom I have no contact, Israeli relatives with whom I have no contact for political reasons, and my close friends in Israel were okay, if one can say so. But my loved ones are in bombarded Gaza, not safe at all. This was Tuesday, and I cannot imagine, let alone describe, the hell in which they have been living through since, the hell that the world gives Israel a free hand to, what verbs should I use here? Free hand to engineer and administer and upgrade. In another message written to me by an Israeli, I was asked whether I had asked the Gazan young woman that I had interviewed. She's a survivor of 4 or 5 Israeli onslaughts on Gaza and a survivor of cancer. He asked me if I asked her what she thought about Saturday's assault, Hamas assault. I told him that I replied to him that I did not ask her. In between bombardments, it's not something I felt I could do. Just that I would not ask now the survivors of Hamas attack certain questions. For example, I wouldn't ask them, those who have lived in lush green communities near Gaza, what they think of Israel's policy of denying water from the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. And what did you do in the army? I didn't ask them. I wouldn't have asked them at that moment. Or do you ever think about the families who inhabited for many generations until 1948 the very soft hills and plains that until Saturday you called home? Or another question, how can you participate in a trans party just a few kilometers away from the largest open prison in the world? The young woman I interviewed and mentioned before sent me this very morning a recorded message where she was crying for the first time. She told me that they were packing a few things and heading south to Khan Yunis because the army ordered the evacuation of the northern half of the Gaza Strip, which means the evacuation of more than 1 million people. 2 homes of friends of mine, in which I used to sleep and to stay when I was last in Gaza in 2009, were destroyed in direct Israeli bombing already on Sunday, amongst many, many others in Gaza City. The 2 families were warned ahead and had to move quickly out. I've lost contact with one of them. A very good friend for more than 30 years. Son of a family of refugees, of course, like many others, and he lived in one of the refugee camps in Gaza before. And in his place, I met, at the beginning of the second Intifada, I met 2 Azzedine el-Qassam seniors. I mean, I guess they were in their 20s, but they were already very engaged in the launching of missiles. And I asked them, he was he said, oh, they had to come to his place because a neighbor was killed and they had to arrange to make sure that that he had no loans to people, so that they together took care of this. And he said, I'll tell them that you are Jewish Israeli, like with a kind of a naughty face, naughty look. And they were surprised, of course, but they respected him, so they were polite with me. And I asked them, why do you launch those missiles? You know that at that time, especially at that time, most of the missiles dropped in Palestinian territory and caused more damage to Bet Hanun, for example, the town of Bet Hanun, than to Israel. And they told me a sentence that instructs me till today, or explains to me till today some of the motivations. They said it's the fear. We want the Israeli mothers and children to be afraid, to fear just as our mothers and children are afraid. And one of the things that were said by survivors of the Hamas onslaught on Saturday was people kept repeating, or it was shown on their faces, how scared they were. So this is a meeting I never forget. But I know, and this friend told me from the first day on Saturday when I called him, he said it's very bad. He was not at all. He's an Orthodox Muslim, and he was very negative about what he heard about the onslaught. He didn't see anything good coming out of it. And he was right. 2-3 days later, he told me there is no house anymore. Some other friends are probably fleeing with the other thousands that fled south. I don't know if he does. While running to the south, they are being bombed too. So I was told by a friend in Rafah. 70 were killed, he told me today, while fleeing. Not all people leave Gaza and the northern parts. There is another friend of mine who told me she couldn't. They stayed at home in southern Gaza City. She said, I cannot go, my mother cannot flee, and her brother-in-law cannot flee. He is mentally challenged after he had been tortured by Shabak in the 70s. And his illness just worsened over the years. They cannot go out. My friends in Rafah, I just heard it now, I contacted to make sure that, to hear them. My friends in Rafah were injured yesterday by a bombardment near their house. 2 neighbors were killed. I don't know if they were operatives of Hamas or not. This is also a house where I used to stay, especially in 2009, when I could enter. 6 or 7 family members were taken to hospital. 1 remained in hospital. When I contacted my friend, he first said, we are okay. And then when I called him, he said we were injured. And then, of course, he asked me how I was doing, like everybody does, as if, keeping this normalcy, this respectable normalcy, even though it's so unrealistic. In between trying to reach my Palestinian friends, I do read more and more reports about Saturday and testimonies of Israeli survivors. We are captives of a binary state of mind, which says either or. We have become part of the TikTok or Facebook culture, where people compete over who listens less and who attacks or insults more. And since very long ago, we have absorbed the values of capitalist competitive society, may I add male-dominated society, where things are arranged in a hierarchy. I do my best to free myself of these 3 confining frames. I allow myself to be appalled by Hamas methods and by the orgy of killings its armed men engaged in. Each day we hear another horrific testimony, and this is not propaganda. Don't delude yourselves that it is propaganda. I tend to conclude that Hamas' impressive military and symbolic achievement in the very breaking in of the walls and fences and the locks of the Gaza prison was wasted by the atrocities committed, let alone the devastation of today in Gaza. But this does not stop me from being haunted now by the indescribable nightmare of more than 2 million people under heavier than heavy Israeli bombardment for almost a week. These are not Hamas targets, don't delude yourselves. These are civilians, children, women, old people that the Jewish army is butchering right now from the air and the sea, and by means of preventing electricity, water, and other vital supplies, and by means of mass forced evacuation from one bombarded area to another. I refuse to place human suffering, pain, and loss in hierarchical order, quantifying and measuring them like onions in a shop. Burnt babies are burnt babies, whether it was an American-made Israeli bomb that set the fire or some armed Hamas men who rolled a burning tire to a home with children. A wiped out family is a wiped out family. Whataboutism should be outlawed. At the same time, I cannot ignore the ways in which cruelty is being administered. I think, and maybe not for today, maybe for later, and I think that this is something for the sake of the Palestinian struggle. We should examine the differences between the Palestinian intimate, close cruelty of Saturday and the Israeli distant surgical cruelty since Saturday, and so regularly and often in the past, and bureaucratic cruelty. Israeli cruelty goes beyond the radar in the West. We see today with all the support that Israel gets from Western leaders. I remember Hilda once calling me or emailing me, I don't remember now exactly, and she referred to an article. She said there is an article of yours circulated by people, and I think it is fake. I think that somebody is trying to frame you as, or to connect you to something which is totally false. And I read the article and I told her, unfortunately, it is all true. The article was about, it was about the military invasion, the Israeli military invasion to Ramallah in 2002. And one of the buildings that the army captured and stayed in, I don't remember now for how long, a week, a month, I don't remember, was the Ministry of Culture. And then when we got into the Ministry of Culture, how shall I say it politely, it became the public restroom, yeah, of the soldiers. The filth was also undescribable, and part of it was, I mean, it was clear that it was not, that it was also intentional. This was a shock for everybody. A shock for everybody that showed a very lower level, a very low level of culture, or showed the very the spite that the soldiers had, even though some of my activist friends in Breaking the Silence told me it's normal needs and they don't know where to, and they don't go out. Later on, I discovered the same thing, the same phenomenon in Gaza during the wars. I mean, after the wars, where soldiers used homes and salons and kitchens as their shitting area, free shitting area. And this is part, again, this is part of the cruelty that is not seen, the levels of cruelty that are not being observed by the West, by the whites. It is not, it does not strike them as cruel. Unlike the cruelty that was, that we were exposed to on Saturday. But still, I think that the cruelty on Saturday is something that Palestinians, and I say it as somebody who has lived with Palestinians for very long, should not take lightly. At the same time that I request this, I refuse to ignore the time factor and ignore the context. As one 19-year-old survivor from Kibbutz Be'eri said in a video recorded message, she asked not to be mentioned by her name. She said, how am I supposed, she is telling not so much about herself, she is only telling about the aftermath, but she says, how am I supposed to wake up in the morning and to know that at a distance of 4.5 kilometers from Be'eri, my kibbutz, in Gaza, there are people that it hasn't been over for them. For me, it was over after 12 hours, which means this nightmare, because there was a place I could be taken to. I'm in the Dead Sea now. Whoever is talking, they are not able. They don't have a place to go to, Palestinians. Whoever is talking about revenge, shame on you. After all what I have been through, I lose so much energy whenever I hear the word revenge. This is a survivor of 19 years old who said it. When she talked about they are still there, and for me it was 12 hours and they are still there in this hell. I remember my father, a survivor, a Holocaust survivor, who told me in 92 or 91, during the first Intifada, I used to come back from Gaza and telling him things, and we would hear things on the radio about the repression and the death and the things that today seem light in comparison to what is to the policies of today and the practices of today. And he said, with a lot of pain, he said, okay, it's not Holocaust, but we had it for 5, 6, 7 years and it was over. But with Palestinians, it's year after year and year after year since 48, and it doesn't come to an end. And this was 93 and we are in 2023. So also talking about time factor, allow me to quote the first paragraph in my op-ed this week. In a few days, Israelis went through what Palestinians have experienced as a matter of routine for decades and are still experiencing. Military incursions, death, cruelty, slain children, bodies piled up in the road, siege, fear, anxiety over loved ones, captivity, being targets of vengeance, the indiscriminate lethal fire at both those involved in the fighting, soldiers, and the uninvolved, civilians, a position of inferiority, destruction of buildings, ruined holidays or celebrations, weakness and helplessness in the face of all-powerful armed men, and searing humiliation. This is not the talk I intended to give. When I agreed with Sarah a few weeks ago on the title, Is Activism Futile? Seems very, yes. It seems prophetic, I don't know, but my original opening paragraphs written before before the 7th of October, were as follows. Or let me say okay, I'll say it later. Like an express train, this is what I wrote before. Like an express train that heads decisively towards its destination, undeterred and uninterrupted by couch grass and thorny weeds, pebbles or bad weather, so does Israel advance in its holy crusade to Judaize the remaining spaces of Palestine and preparing the ground for another mass expulsion of Palestinians. Nothing is sacred except for the soil and stones and the holy profit that it generates for Jews. Life, history, and present of human beings other than Jews, universal rights, the environment, the landscapes, are all rendered redundant by the 11th commandment, Thou shalt execute the Torah as exclusive eternal land deed that God bequeaths to its chosen people. I deliberately, I continued, do not indulge in definitions, the shortcuts, the academic shortcuts or sociological shortcuts that they offer us. I prefer to describe the decades-long process and let people define or diagnose it as they wish. This is a process in which Israel and its citizens expelled Palestinians from their homes and homeland and crammed the rest of them in dense, landless enclaves. In Israel proper after 48, and in Gaza also after 48, and in the West Bank especially after 1993. Yes, with the so-called Oslo peace process. It's with Oslo that Israel confirmed what Palestinians have said for years. Its first and main goal is the grab of more and more Palestinian land and getting rid of more and more Palestinians. Under the guise of a peace process, Israel molded a geopolitical reality of Palestinian Bantustans. Without necessarily agreeing on definitions or comprehending the full implications of mass expulsions in the past of the indigenous population, over the decades, there have always been Jewish Israelis who understood and felt that there was something wrong with the basic Israeli paradigm. In order to simplify and move forward, I'll call them activists, a word I'm not sure was in wide use 30 or 40 years ago. Perhaps because they belong to certain parties, organizations, I don't know. Some were too moderate by the taste of others or by the taste of today. Some too radical. But ours is not just a binary era, it is also very purist and judgmental. But I'll put them all in the same basket because I believe that contradictions, confusion, impurity, differences widen the understanding. I believe, or I want to hope. What social and political activists that I have in mind share in common, not only in the Palestinian-Israeli context, is a profound belief that human-made change for the better is not only needed, but possible, and that it needs a collective work. I think of the many activists I have known in Israel, in Palestine, and outside, feminists, Mizrahi Jews, Black Lives Matter, activists for affordable housing, Soviet bloc dissidents. The belief in the ability of an active collective to divert trajectories depends also on the assumption that humans are a rational species and identify injustice as a wrong that may negatively affect everybody. This is more or less the point that I reached on Friday before in the preparation of my talk. I did not really prepare or plan to respond to my own question. I wanted to leave it as an open question or for discussion or maybe for my mood at the moment. I did want to convey to you, and I hope I did, even before today, a certain sense of despair that we feel among anti-occupation activists, Israeli activists, and in me as well, that got stronger and stronger during the last month. When I thought about it, when I thought about the despair, I had the West Bank in my mind. Of course, Gaza is always, but especially in the West Bank because of the process of the process of colonization. And the boldness of the present government. But it started even before. One clear moment of despair that we all shared, activists and journalists and Palestinians. One clear moment of despair hit us was on May 4th, 2022, when High Court ruled that it's okay for the state to expel the villagers of Masafer Yatta and to destroy their villages. After 23 years of legal battle and of popular battle and articles and delegations and statements of European Union who said that this is against international law to forcibly expel occupied populations. After all these years and the honors just dismissed everything and said that the Palestinians there were invaders to military area. They had never been there before, and the state has the right to expel them. In this place, in Masafer Yatta, was kind of a meeting place of so many activists, so many initiatives over the years, so many groups, and so many amazing relations that have developed between the people, the Palestinians, and the activists. Also foreigners, many leftist Jews from America and other places, and it became a place that could inspire some hope in these dark times. The people's resilience was always amazing. The heads of the communities initiated several times or defied the army several times by connecting the villages to water in a very simple pipe. It's even ridiculous to call it a grid. It's not a grid, but they defied an Israeli prohibition on Palestinians there to connect to water. It was the Israelis came and destroyed it, and they came and they reconnected them several times. They enlarged the roads so that people could drive. Now, after this civilian decision of the High Court, the army and the settlers feel free to further to increase their pressure on the people so that they would live. And people do live because they cannot drive to their homes, they cannot reach it, they are being arrested, their cars are being, if they try the car, they are being confiscated, people cannot visit them, they don't have water, they don't have electricity, and settlers all the time harass and terrorize them and keep them away from their pasture area. Settlers also built some outposts in the very territory which was declared military zone forbidden for people to live in. Nothing helped. There were proofs that the people had lived there since the 19th century. Nothing moved the judges. I think this is a point where many of us felt despair. Then another moment of despair was when 3 years of demonstrations against Netanyahu brought about a government that was called the government of change, or a coalition of change, but it was headed by Bennett, a long supporter of settlers, and though he's not a settler himself, and his party full with settlers. And in this government, there were together liberals and soft right-wing with more hardcore right-wing. Only Netanyahu and Likud were not there. But of course, this same government of change, also encouraged the settlement expansion just as before. And a third point that I can relate to was of despair was the judicial overhaul of the present Netanyahu government. On the outset, years-long warnings of the tiny Israeli left wing were proven right. Tyrannical methods and worldviews spill over. They cannot stop at the border, the green line. They cannot be employed only against the Palestinians. There was some optimism at the beginning of these demonstrations that the people, the demonstrators, would draw the necessary direct line. Especially that, as if by the book, the very initiators and supporters of the overhaul show misogyny, extreme libertarian positions that aim at annihilating the remaining traces of a welfare society, public school systems and workers' rights, homophobia, scorn towards the old and the poor. All this they shamelessly express in papers, in researches, and in statements. And also by the book, the overhaul has been meticulously prepared and planned for years by a right-wing research center, Kohelet, financed by two Jewish American tycoons who support Trump. This center, for example, together with Nir Barkat, a former mayor of Jerusalem and a millionaire by his own merit, designed together a plan to increase the number of Jewish settlers in the West Bank to 2 million by 2048. The proportion of religious Zionist settlers among the planners and supporters in the overhaul and within the present government far exceeds their proportion in the society. So this discrepancy, we felt, can motivate people to draw the connections. Especially that this authoritarian overhaul clashes with the still existing ethos of large segments of the Israeli society, the ethos of a welfare state system. Even though this system has been deliberately crushed over the years, the concept that the state society should guarantee for the education and health of the citizens has solid support among many people who participate in the protests. But the overhaul and the power it gives to the executive authority and the rabbis it has to please threatens to undermine achievements of the feminist movement and the struggles and of the movement and struggles and of the LGBT community. Add to this the fact that the present government buys the religious Orthodox, officially non-Zionist parties' support by extreme generous financial allocations to their separate education frameworks, and by all sorts of allowances and benefits while cutting subsidies to the secular institutions. So it looks like the ground is ready for people's anger and action and opposition to this government, as was expressed in the demonstrations. But at the same time, the judicial overhaul clashes with the well-being of the mostly secular, liberal, militaristic strata of the society that owes much of its status and career to the economy of a sophisticated occupying power. Not all protesters have necessarily substantial military background, but they are of the social class that is mostly connected with the national ethos of military service and the People's Army, which in many cases has also been the basis for social visibility and economical comfort. The proportion of proud ex and present military and intelligence personnel among the representatives, official or not official, and organizers of the protests is much higher than their proportion within the general population and the protesters themselves. The semblance of a normal democratic state with a judiciary that is respected the world over gave this strata both mental and legal peace of mind for years, until this government. Many ex and present military men and women openly say that the crippled High Court would expose them and others to charges over war crimes in international courts, and that what has saved them and their like was the high prestige of the Israeli court system and reputation as independent. I wish their concern, I wrote this before today, before the 7th, I wish their concern had solid basis. But we see now how they don't hesitate to crush Gaza, and how their Knesset representatives, until now in the opposition, join the government and lead together the present murderous war against the Palestinians. So we didn't see the protesters joining us in or connecting the occupation with the overhaul, though they were okay. We always believe in dynamics, and you did hear an ex-head of Mossad saying it's apartheid, and another military officer or ex-military officer warning about the consequences. People said it, as we say in Arabic, sahinom, a bit, or Boker Tov Eliyahu in Hebrew, but still maybe better later than never. But still it was not the masses. And in the meantime, the settlers continue with their taking over of land in the West Bank and intensifying their terrorist activities against Palestinian communities. And it continues, and nobody stops it. People know, people in Haaretz mostly lament it, readers, but it continues. And just as 30 years ago and 40 years ago, the perpetrators are not found, so is it now. And now some of the perpetrators are in the Knesset. And they have also their, it is not a new phenomenon, but now they get the boost because their people are in the government, and Bezalel Smotrich, a settler and a very ideological settler, was nominated actually the Gauleiter of the West Bank. And before he was the Gauleiter of the West Bank, he already had the plan. He already had a plan that the decisive or decision plan, offering Palestinians three options. One, to accept the fact that they are defeated and to live as second or third or fourth or fifth subjects in the land. The second one, the preferable one for him, was to emigrate, which means voluntary transfer. And the third option that he talked about it, he wrote about it, was if you don't accept and if you don't give in, if you don't emigrate and you decide to fight, the IDF will know how to fight you. He then said he didn't mean to kill children and women, but it doesn't matter because he was very clear. So we see in front of our eyes this plan of Smotrich being carried out on the ground. We saw it in the West Bank. Of course, Gaza is always our minds, and the people, the settlers do speak about return to Gaza and rebuilding settlements over there. What is very distressing and adding to our despair is the fact that most of those communities who have been exposed to the terror of settlers for all these years, and especially in the last 2 years, are are just standing there themselves alone, except of a few Israeli activists, and except for a group of Fatah people, not beloved by the Palestinian public in general, who do go and try to call for demonstrations against the outpost, the settlement outpost, and sometimes come as protection, but without much success. The PA is totally absent. When Palestinians are being attacked, the PA police is not allowed, according to Oslo, to go and protect them. Of course, not with uniforms, of course, not with weapons. But nobody in the Palestinian Authority has initiated something else that led them, instead of the many PA police that are spread all around, or national security, instead of them being in the cities, let them go and be hundreds in each village that is being threatened by settlers. And not just the village, it's the lands of the village, it's the lands of the Palestinian people. But this doesn't work, and attempts of those Fatah activists to call for more volunteers to assist and to protect go unnoticed, because unarmed popular struggle has no popularity. And Hamas, in their actions, or the armed groups that are in Jenin or Nablus, also don't take this imminent danger as part of their considerations for, I don't say for an armed presence, but they don't take this as part of their consideration for a struggle. Before these dark days, I wanted to end with a saying that many or most of those activists that I've been didn't say names and didn't say names of the groups, but many of them, I think, accept now the framework or understand the framework of the settler colonial project. They understand that this is the framework, and they acknowledge. We acknowledge. I can add myself to these groups, doing this through my writing. We acknowledge our weakness. But we also understand that the struggle is mainly in the hands of the Palestinians. I mean, this is the struggle is a Palestinian struggle for a change. We can join, we can or not join, or do what we can do, but the struggle is Palestinian. Now what we can say is that we cannot undo history, we cannot undo the past in the meantime. We can try, and we have tried, and for some years it has succeeded, to contain the speed of this train, to not to let it rush so quickly towards the abyss, with the hope that in the meantime something will change in the world, something will change in the Palestinian political life, political arrangements, I don't know, something like that. And also, that that we want, by doing this, we want to prevent, or to prevent the moment, or to prevent such an escalation or such brutalization from which there is no return. Not to reach the point of such brutalization. And it seems even more a dream today than ever. I have no doubt that Hamas is now, and every Palestinian says it, is positioning itself as the main Palestinian organization. I don't know if in these methods, if the armed struggle of Hamas is the one that stops the train of Israeli settler colonialism. And if it does, by what price? I don't know. Thank you.
Thank you, Amira, for your solidarity with the Palestinians. I mean, we really appreciate this. Two things, 2 points, very briefly. How could we stop the transfer of the Palestinians of Gaza? Now 2 million people are threatened with transfer, and the ultimatum is going to expire within a few hours from now. This is one thing. Another thing is a strategic suggestion, or the options, for the to reinvent the Palestinian revolutionary movement and Jewish, of course, radicals or revolutionaries on the other side. How could this be reinvented? And thank you. This is it.
Thank you for your very painful remarks, Amira. My question is, what role can the international community play to stop the train? Do you think that is likely to happen? What can we do here to try to make it happen? Or do you just think they've shown their true colors and that's what we've got?
You use the term despair several times in the course, and who could not understand that as being entirely appropriate. I've been wondering at this extraordinarily violent and in its limited, framed in the most limited way, assault on Saturday. If that, it struck me as in a way, a very large suicide pact, because most of those people who undertook it were sure to die. And in a way, it seemed to be like the ultimate expression of despair. And I suppose I could say more, but that's really my question, is how you assess it in those terms.
Thank you. Let me start with this one, because it's really one of the points that I hope that we could return to. When the testimonies about Saturday were unfolding, at the beginning, I think all of us felt like, that's, like the military achievement was indeed impressive, and it showed how the Israelis don't take, they were not prepared because they were so looking down at the Palestinians, downgrading them. And this was, but later on with the reports, and they still continue to come, I could not but feel that there is something crazed about these young people. I don't know to what extent they got they were allowed to, or it was not expected, I don't know. But their behavior, and I don't even want to repeat some of the things that I heard, their behavior told me how, even though I lived 30 years among the Palestinians, and even though I know about the closure, I mean, I've written about the closure, and I've written about the repression, I probably understood the terrible repercussions of these policies on people, but couldn't totally grasp it. And yes, I think it was rage, but I think it was much more than rage. I have many friends who would have never been engaged in it. So is it the trauma and we cannot say that people in Gaza have post-trauma because they are in permanent trauma. It's trauma over trauma over trauma. So I think it's the psychological impact of the closure, of the siege, of the blockade, of the humiliation, of all the wars, of the fact that they are completely disconnected. They don't know what's happening in the world, or if they know, they just go to military camps outside in Iran or Syria or wherever it was. But I feel a bit humbled. I mean, I feel that this is something that Palestinians should research and should work on it, not us, certainly not Israeli Jews. I mean, I can comment, but I think that it will come, that this has to be taken not lightly, as I said before, by Palestinians. And it's interesting that I think that almost the only people who only Palestinians who dared to openly speak against it were Palestinians who are Israeli citizens. And in a way, if I want to balance the despair, I say that at least there is this group that has built relations of not with all Israeli Jews, but with some of trust, of partnership that might be a springboard for the future. Might be, if it's. But they are the only ones who dared to write and to criticize, and also, I don't like the word criticize, to show their how appalled they were by this, and to say this is not right for us. Unlike, unfortunately, Palestinians in the West Bank that I felt from my talks with them belittled or wanted to believe that there was a lot of propaganda. Some parts, but it is not the main thing was not the main reports are not propaganda. But they wanted to belittle it, or they started with all kind of other explanations. But I think that as a phenomenon for the Palestinian people, it has to be approached and studied and reproached by Palestinians, first of all. Now, all the questions about the world, what can I say now? Maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we could feel that there was okay, or 1 year ago, the West felt that Netanyahu got insane and Michigane, and I don't know, and then. But now this support is this blanket support to Israel. You see how much the West is. He likes the white victims, those who look like the West. I mean, it's so ironical that all of a sudden we Jews became the white. Just 70 years ago we were the blacks, and now we were. And they just don't consider the Palestinian, the victimization of Palestinians. It's, they don't look like them. So I cannot answer this question. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I still would say go on, demand that Israelis cannot enter Europe freely, they need visas. Now America gives us, now we have a waiver for entering America. So there is such a discrepancy between what we feel is the mood of the people. I don't know if it's true. Maybe we mislead ourselves when we think that the majority is supportive of Palestinians. I don't know. But there is such a discrepancy between the logic of the things that we say and the truth and the magnitude of Israeli oppression and the way that the West allows this to continue. And now they got, okay, an opportunity to come and support Netanyahu that just a while ago they understood he was dangerous. And Biden did not see him at the White House. So I cannot answer this question. The same with Gaza. I mean, I said despair before. I now don't have a word in my dictionary for what I feel about Gaza. When we see all the destroyed houses, smashed houses, in streets that I knew, and I like to walk there, and and every moment that so many people don't know what happens to their loved ones and who will remain. One of my friends told me, I told her I don't even know what to ask on WhatsApp. And she says, ask, it might be the last question. So this, right now, half of Gaza, so it seems, but not half of Gaza, because people refuse to leave their homes. Will the Israelis feel that they have the license really to kill? I cannot even say the words. I've been always very cautious about the use of the word genocide. Always. I thought that it was a tendency to say genocide about things that it's bad enough to be mass massacre and mass killing, and I don't need to use the term genocide. I think it's the first time that I say it, that there are genocidal, for sure, genocidal intentions that we hear from what they say, and they feel totally free to say it. And I'm afraid that we are, I mean, what I feel, I say that I see there is genocide in our living room. I mean, we all watch it. So before, transfer, I don't know if it's, I would like Egypt to open the terminal and let Gazans go and save their lives. But then, of course, it's clear that Egypt is afraid that Israel would not allow them back. The same with Jordan. We saw Jordan, I mean, that the king warned Blinken today that he is afraid, he warned about this possibility that Israel will expel Palestinians also from the West Bank and Gaza. For years I've been warning about expulsion, about the vector of expulsion, when there were all kinds of initiatives, solutions so-called, to have one state because the settlements are irreversible. I said this is a very dangerous position because the settlements are there not in order to live equally in a binational state, Palestinians and Israelis. The settlements there are in order to expel Palestinians. And this vector, this logic of the settlements has only become clearer and crystallized over the last 20, 30 years. So I've been warning about expulsion, always hoping that the warning would prevent it. I mean, not only mine, that we would not come to the stage where it is so, so, so real. The right wing, this is something, and this is also some of the considerations that the supporters of the armed struggle or so-called armed struggle don't take into account. The right wing always counts on wars, because at wars you can achieve things, you can perpetuate things, atrocities that are not acceptable in regular times. The right wing in Israel has always been happy. I remember in 2003, they were waiting when United States attacked Iraq, they were waiting for more. They were waiting for Israel being attacked, or Israelis being attacked by Palestinians, so that they could initiate smaller scale, bigger scale expulsions. And but this is taken lightly. This is one of the things, one of the typical characteristics of the right wing that I think are not taken into considerations by the Palestinian not political, but armed groups. There is an aura of sanctity around this concept of armed struggle, and I don't think it is politically understood in full what the implications are. Yes, it might change the political structure of Palestinian people and bring Hamas to the forward. But as I said at the end of my talk, I don't know how much it will succeed in blocking this train, because in spite of the weakness that we saw, the real weakness and confusion that we saw on Saturday, it is repairable for some time. It is repairable, but then at the cost of lives of so many Palestinians, lives and change. So I'm sorry, it's not a day with answers. Yeah. Now you asked about how to reinvent. There are some people who think that are better than me in, in the talk of imagining another thing. I'm not so much of this school. I'm very, very restricted in my imagination in that sense. I think more about steps, about little incremental steps. And as I said, 48 can be some sort of a basis. The relations that people do have, Palestinians and Israelis, and Israeli Jews in Israel, is something that has a potential to develop. And some do, people talk about visions. Vision is not my strong side. I think it's because I come from a communist family and I saw what happens with visions, and I prefer to talk about guidelines, about road signs, or principles that basic principles that there is no discussion about, and then we proceed. But now it even looks like a bit too late, or not the right moment. Let's say not the right moment. Some questions.
I think your hand was first. Thank you. So in spite of what you said, I want to stay with that. You described eloquently the despair, and it's painful to hear, and thank you for that. But with your experience, could you try still to provide some guidelines towards direction that can channel activism? I get your point, a very important point, that the change should come from the Palestinian society. This is very important. I get it. So that's one. And the second is, do you think that the current carnage could somehow lead to geopolitical changes that will take us in a direction that's not total disaster, but maybe something. I mean, thank you though.
Did you want multiple questions, Amira? Again?
Some more, yeah.
Okay,
So
thank you.
wait,
So
okay. I need. Sorry, I need a summary of the question. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. Geopolitical change, yeah.
And guidelines towards activism, but
Okay, yeah.
understanding that the main changes should come from Palestinian society, but for maybe the others, what can be done.
thank you. And you'll be next. You got it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Can you, this is somewhat related to the previous question, what do you think the future might hold for the normalization process? And has this come to a halt? And what impact might this have on the so-called Abraham Accords? Thanks.
one more.
Thank you for the sharing. I want to ask what kind of psychological attack, psychological impact has the attack by Hamas has on the Israel public? I mean, within the society, do the different groups of people, I mean, the government supporters, the left-wing individuals, or opposition parties still have different diversified views, or they tend to have consistent response?
Yeah. Again, any question that that wants me to guess or to prophesize. Usually what I say about these questions is that, oh, I forgot my crystal ball at home. But I saw just passing, when before we got out of the house, that there is a report that now that Saudi is halting its normalization steps. Look, I want to hope that the demonstrations, mass demonstrations in Iraq and mass demonstration in Amman, and maybe later on in some other places, some other Arab states, will frighten or will tell the leaders who don't give a damn neither about Palestinians, I guess, nor about their own people, but will give them will signal that they cannot just do anything with Israel at this time. I want to hope. I don't know if it's if I I don't have enough material to guess, and not a crystal, not other means, more. I only want to hope, because it's a disgrace. This normalization process has been a disgrace. We knew all the time that that the populations in those Arab states were against the normalization. And now it gave them reason to dare and to go out to the streets more than they would have, in numbers more probably than before. So I guess it also depends, is there Palestinian diplomacy? Is it diplomacy only of Hamas? Is there a diplomacy of others, of groups? It also depends on these things. Palestinians are not just, passive recipients of oppression. They have proven that they can also be, and that they are agents of their life. And the same about geopolitical change. I hinted that maybe, people say, not I, but people say that certainly Hamas will it won't be crushed, unlike what Israel thinks. The leadership, the main leadership of Hamas is outside. I think the diaspora, Palestinians in diaspora, adore Hamas for its military achievements. Probably more than Gaza people adore them. People in the West Bank, they have a lot of support or admiration. But we mean it's a process of years. I know that in the also, I mentioned it is, we call it Davai Nachala. So in Russian it is, okay, from the beginning. Okay, now back to the beginning. I don't know, it's not exactly the beginning. Some say it's even before the beginning. But guidelines for activism. Not to despair, probably. Guidelines first for Israeli activists, Israeli Jewish, Jewish here, is that we do things not for our own, not because we want to feel good, but because it's a must. We cannot be people in the world and with our background, family background, people's background, and just not be involved in the main fight for saving Jewish dignity. Again, I mean, I say it's not for helping Palestinians. It's just because we are part of this country, and Jews outside the Palestine, Israel, have automatically more rights in Israel, in Palestine, than any Palestinian has. So that's why they have to be involved in the correction or in the or as much as possible undoing of the injustice, tremendous injustice there. Another guideline is that, I said before, but this is about undoing history, that we cannot undo history and undo the past. And here it's always important for me to say, it's important for me to say that we are settler colonialism, that Zionism from the start was part of the settler colonial, European settler colonial phenomenon and movement, though it came a bit later. But that until the 30s or the 40s, the majority of the Jews did not opt for Zionism as a solution or as a leeway to what they have experienced in anti-Semitic societies in Europe. So the other part of Zionism was not just the settler colonial, it was indeed an attempt to address the problem of European racism towards Jews. So like it was one and the opposite. Zionism was one and the opposite. And because of the change of the law in 1924, and then Hitler, more Jews started to see them to accept or to see Zionism as a viable solution. So I say, if not for the Holocaust, if not for Nazi Germany, if not of this, if the diaspora, the majority of Jews felt that diaspora is a natural living ground for Jews. We are developing as some kind of a people, but a people that does not need an army or a state. And this changed with events. Zionism existed before the Holocaust, of course. But again, I say, I doubt, and I say it from my family's experience, I doubt that so many Jews would have, the remaining Jews would have come if not for the events. So we have to connect. This is important, and this is something that I say to Palestinians. It's not always easy. They don't always like to hear it. They think it makes me a Zionist. But I think we have to analyze history not in models, but in the facts of the history, not according to models. I think these are, yeah. Sorry? More questions, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I want to go back to something you mentioned on how Palestinians inside Israel are the only ones who said this is not us and wrote about this. This is not us, or this should not be us. And I just want to mention that you would hear that a lot in private among Palestinians, but not in public. It is very difficult to say it in public. The way you're describing how because of Nazi Germany and the Holocaust, then there was the state of Israel. I mean, Palestinians can also draw a parallel and say, because of Israel, now there is Hamas. And maybe 30 years ago, it was the first intifada, the images were a certain way, and now the image is completely different. Palestinian society and culture has changed over the past 3 decades, that we are seeing Hamas. What I wanted to, we're seeing this operation that happened on Saturday by Hamas. What I wanted to ask you is, what I wanted to ask is, again, this is not, I don't want you to prophesize, but what I wanted to ask you that if Hamas captured 50 soldiers and left, and that was an operation to exchange political prisoners, wouldn't Israel have done the same? And that's maybe a justification for, in the minds of some, about the need to use violence in order to achieve certain goals.
Thank you, Amira. I have 2 questions, pragmatic, ethical questions. The first, is it working? Yeah. The first one is about a note that was on The Guardian, almost en passant.
The what?
The news from The Guardian mentioning that Egypt had warned Israel before the Saturday events, and how this would change the aesthetic appeal of the violent display of military action and so on and so forth. First. Second, it's this effort to equalize the victims. Because on the one hand, you have, of course, people living in an open-air prison, but on the other, you have the settler. And this settler, and this word is very problematic, because despite from the children or those that are not able to exert any sort of autonomy, that person made an option to be there. And it's illegal, it's condemned everywhere. But when that person becomes a victim, not as an individual, of course, but as a group, this is highly problematic. And it's a narrative that is almost like an elephant in the room, but still we tend to look at the civilian victims as equivalents. And in my opinion, they're not necessarily equivalents, because there was an option there. No one opted to become a prisoner, but someone opted to become a settler.
You mean a settler in the kibbutzim around Gaza?
Yeah.
Thank you, Amira, for the talk. So I somehow connect with the previous question. It's about the psychology of Israelis and Palestinians. Maybe it's not about guessing, but because you live with them. So there is this visual artist called Choshki, who made this caricature about Jews fighting for justice with an elephant in the middle, painting the Israeli occupation, and people just call for other justice, but seem to not see the elephant. So this is I don't understand the general psychology of Israelis. Is it a collective denial or a schizophrenia or something like that? Also, because if someone lives Holocaust, he shouldn't perpetrate the same with other communities or states or people. And the second question that is connected is Israel. People are saying that Israel knew about it and disdained, somehow minimized the attack. Maybe because the government wanted to recreate cohesion, like a social cohesion in Israel, finding a common enemy, that isn't Netanyahu, but Hamas.
Okay.
The psychology of Palestinians, I think we lived just 3 months of COVID thing, and we went crazy. So they are living that for I don't know how many years now.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is a question.
Okay, let me start with, I'm not sure that Israel created Hamas. I think that Hamas is a natural development like in other Arab Muslim countries when the Muslim Brothers. I mean, of course, it had its special developments because of the occupation, and but I think it is something of the society, and it is also not everything is a derivative of the occupation. The form that it is, like as we talked with Sarah before, the people that we knew of Hamas 30 years ago, I don't think that they're very far from this. Hamas had a very clear ethos at the beginning, just after it was created, it was established. It didn't touch civilians. It only at the beginning, until Goldstein, until the massacre of Goldstein in February '94, Hamas only attacked soldiers and settlers. So it was very clear. It was very, very clear. And then it opened, but it changed. So, but as a phenomenon of the society, of a Muslim society, the religiosity of the society, I think it's common to many Arab countries and Muslim countries, especially with the dwindling of the nationalist appeal and the socialist appeal. Now, thank you for saying that many people in private say, and this is also something that, in our TikTok era, people are afraid to say their positions or ideas if they think that the public would not accept it. So they say things in private and not in public. But I'm glad to hear from you that people are not comfortable with it, or even more, in private. Now, the question I asked myself, the same questions as you asked. If Hamas managed just to make it a military operation and hijacking soldiers or taking soldiers as prisoners and not reaching the civilians, would Israel have done differently? I cannot answer, of course. I think, now part of the devastation is that they said they were looking for hostages or prisoners in the north of Gaza. I heard from a friend of mine in Gaza that at least 13 or 14 were already killed. Hamas announced that 13 or 14 of the prisoners were killed. Who knows how many more? I personally think that Israel did not opt, from the start, it did not opt to negotiate about them. And it wants to, we say, you asked me before about, somebody asked me here about, was the Israeli, was it a intended neglect or disregard of the warnings in order to create cohesion? Our conclusion, many people's conclusion, is that this government and the governments before do not care or did not pay attention to this area because it is exactly the area that doesn't vote for Netanyahu and for Likud. That's cynical. And we've had it. There were some of the posts, Facebook posts, that refer to it, that people who are on the Netanyahu camp expressed indifference because of the fact that these are Ashkenazi, well-off, secular Israelis who live in in this area, in these localities. There was, I also saw the headline. I didn't read the whole piece, but there was a headline that in one of the religious Orthodox settler websites, somebody wrote, a professor for something, wrote that this is God's plan to punish something crazy. I mean, we are talking about also crazed elements in this society. I guess that the power and the feeling of might and connected to God and connected to God's messages, we see it does change something in the chemistry of people's minds, brains. So I asked myself, I cannot tell. Smotrich, the one I mentioned before, he said openly, we have to be cruel, and no matter about the prisoners. So from the start, their position was that they are not going to trade. And people wrote, I saw people's notes on Haaretz website. They say if these were settlers, I mean settlers of the West Bank and Orthodox settlers, the attitude would have been different. That's people's impression. So the schism in Israeli society has come to such, or the tribal schism has come to such a point that people conclude that Orthodox religious Jews who are connected to the settler movement in the West Bank just don't give a damn about the kibbutzim because these are secular and these are not the constituency of the right wing or of the extreme right wing. I believe that, I believe that the Israeli army disregarded the warnings because it is so inflicted by disregard of Palestinians or by it's the hubris, it's the miscalculation of the situation. They disconnected Gaza from Palestine and from the population of the West Bank, in contradiction to Oslo, but already before, in 91, the disconnect of Gaza from the rest of the Palestinian people started in 91, not under Hamas. This is one of the myths that both Hamas and Israel like to propagate. So it started much earlier, but it was gradual. The disconnect was gradual. And the Israelis think that it works, that this disconnect works, but it's a Palestinian people. The people feel a people. So yeah, sometimes I feel too like I'm a honorary Gazan. So people feel, I do feel in the West Bank some kind of sometimes attitudes of even, Gazans say it's racism. I wouldn't say racism, but looking down at Gazans or don't, not in such times. But in regular times, the Gazans complain about mistreatment of West Bankers towards them. But it's, the folklore of Palestinian society. Not only them, but as a whole, it is a people. I mean, they have, true, the separation succeeded in creating, first of all, creating this political schism. As the late Iyad Sarraj, Dr. Iyad Sarraj said in Gaza, he told me in 2008, Israel wrote the script, but the two parties, the two actors, Hamas and Fatah, played their role بامتياز, excellently, yeah. So I think that first of all, the warning fell on deaf ears because they were just sha'ananim. Complacent? Okay. I'm not sure, but they were They just thought that it's working, everything is working, their policies work there. Then there was another report that the surveillance balloons that Israel has over Gaza, something got amiss in the last days, in the last weeks, and they didn't bother to repair them. So they didn't think it was urgent something. Everything was working fine. So they look down at Palestinians as a whole, or they really think that they can manipulate with a few hundreds of dollars here or there. So this is the disease of an occupier and colonizer that doesn't see the person they colonize and occupy as equal, as a human being, the person and the people. So I think that in that sense, the answer is simpler. Now, the option to live in kibbutzim settlements. Yes, it's like you people with European descent that you have the option not to live in a indigenous country, indigenous land. The question is, how far can we go? Is it because this here is 200 years ago, 300 years ago, that you're settler colonials for 300 years and we are for 75 years? So in that sense, it's true, I live in El Bire, I lived in Gaza for the last 30 years. I live in the 67 territory. But I am an Israeli, so I'm also a settler. And I'll tell you, once there was a Palestinian. His father is Palestinian, his mother is Spanish, and he is a young academic, one of those brilliant academics who were born outside, so he didn't know Arabic by then. And he wanted to consult with me about something for his PhD. And we met, and I felt that he was not happy. There were things I could tell him for his thesis, but he was a bit stressed. We met in Ramallah, and I said, somehow I asked him, what's the problem? He said, I want you to acknowledge that you are a settler. So I looked at him, and I was pained. Since then, I accept it, but it was the first time that somebody told it to me so outright, like that I'm a settler. And I looked, I think that I even had some tears in my throat. And I told him, you know what, okay, I'll acknowledge that I'm a settler, but you will acknowledge that if Spain did not expel the Jews in 1492, I wouldn't have been there. Now, my mother's family is from Spain. I think that they felt very good in Spain. And they were expelled. And then they came to the Ottoman Empire, accepted them in the Balkans. And she lived in Sarajevo. And she felt at home in Sarajevo. And then Nazi occupation, German occupation came. And when she returned from the concentration camp, the employee, the clerk at the municipality, when she wanted to register again as a resident she moved to Belgrade, she had been before there too, the woman told her at the municipality, but here it's written that you emigrated. Why do you come back? So this is not only her experience. This is, as studies show, that was experience of many Jews who returned from the concentration camps and ghettos, and they thought that they would be welcome in they would go and be part of their previous societies, and they discovered that they were not. In some places, it culminated in pogroms against them. So, how do I deal with history? Do I say that the whole chain is a chain of criminality, and we have to punish the criminals that are also people who were born all of Israel is Palestinian land. I see it, one of the reasons that I live in Ramallah, that I realize that I live in Ramallah, is that I see now a different Nakba, but I'm not exposed to the Nakba as I am when I am in Israel. I see in every corner, I know. But at the same time, what shall I say to the people? Where should they live? Shall we build one skyscraper and live 7 million Jews in? I don't know what to tell you. So the kibbutzim around Gaza are no more or no less settlements than my apartment or the apartment that I had in Jerusalem. It's also Palestinian land. The thing is that we can work for the future. I mean, for the present and for the future. We cannot, if we want to undo the past, we have to acknowledge that it will be with so much bloodshed, with so much death, that is it worthwhile? Because if people come and tell the Israelis now, you have to leave the place. You had the option to go and live in Germany, go back to Germany. Many do, but the majority cannot and will not. Look, I hear not once and not twice from Palestinians, was sometimes in Gaza, abroad, diaspora, and in the West Bank. The statement that if I'm so radical, then I should leave. That and this is, and I see it on. But settler colonialism is not a personal matter. Is not an individual matter, and it is not. It cannot be solved by individual steps, especially of the people who are against the settler colonialism. What good will it be? Will it give to the Palestinian struggle? I don't know. Not that I think that we are so wow for changing the reality now. That was the whole content of my talk, that we are not wow at all. But the cost of undoing history and undoing the past will be far too high, not only to Jews, but also and maybe first of all to Palestinians. So for the sake of the land, is it worthwhile to kill 5 million Palestinians, 4 million Palestinians? Okay. How Israelis, the psychology of Israelis who don't connect to the. Look, I think that this is exactly the psychology of any privileged group. You need a struggle. You need a very strong struggle in order to make a privileged group understand that there is something wrong with the privileges. Let us take men. Do you think that men would have agreed for all kinds of changes in the status of women if there was no feminist struggles all over the world? And still we have not come to the point where there are equal rights. So I think it's in a sense, it's very simple. It's not, and I think it was true about other colonizing societies. France, for example, of course, South Africa. You need people, of course, who can make some who can be more courageous and on both sides, but in essence, no privileged group gives up on the privileges without a struggle of the occupied people, but it's or the subjugated group. But of course, here we have other problems. We have the collaboration of the world. We have the split in the Arab world. We have the problems of the discrepancy between the terrible discrepancy between the Israeli military might and the Palestinians. And as much as Hamas managed to show us that they built themselves and geared themselves to being a military force, I still think the costs, the costs of the Palestinians are much, much higher in order to call it a victory. It is a Hamas victory, but it is not a Palestinian victory. That's my opinion. And about those who have been through the Shoah, so the Holocaust, should not do the same thing to others. Yes, but we see that we see so many examples of people who are inflicting suffering to others even though they suffered, be it regimes, I mean, people who were in liberation movements before and they were tortured as leaders or members of liberation movements, and then they tortured their own people. So I don't think that we are unique in that sense. I do agree that the Holocaust became one of the main weapons in Israeli hands in order to enable certainly 48, and later on to enable suppressing any movement, any Palestinian movement, an international movement that criticizes Israel. Israel has been manipulating the Holocaust for decades already, and this is something that I tell European diplomats. They do it. They desecrate my family. My family's memory and my family's life by using their plight and their death in order to enable the suppression of the Palestinians. Yeah. More? There is more? Yeah, yeah, I'm fine. No, I came for...
First of all, thank you very much for enlightening all of us. When I read the papers, I will read them now in different light. My question to you is your own wording, undoing the injustice. As if I heard you right, two-state solution is not possible anymore with the Orthodox settlers, the numbers increasing and so on, and you don't even know, you cannot even divide the land anymore for two-state solution. What would it take Israel and the entire Western world, the supporters of Israel, to understand, to put in place one single state with equal rights for all Palestinians? Will it ever happen? Maybe not in your lifetime, in our lifetime, maybe in our grandchildren's life. Do you think it will ever happen? What will it take? I would like to hear the answer from you. Thank you.
Two more.
Hello, thank you so much for being here. You mentioned earlier a little bit about white suffering versus brown suffering. As a brown person and someone who was born to a Muslim family, I begrudgingly understand that my body is not considered in the same regard as other bodies. But when I look at the relationship that some Western countries have with countries like Saudi Arabia, which is also full of Muslim and brown people, I can't help but question the economics of it all. Here at the university, you see the student body fearing their employment opportunities when considering their moral voice. As someone coming from a perspective on the left, I'm wondering what your comments are on the economics of it all, and whether justice is even a consideration when opposed with economic and political interests, whether white bodies or brown.
I thank you so much. This was extremely enlightening and very hard to listen, all of your questions too. I just wanted to add something to my friend's petition not to equate the victims, because to me, the problem is not that the victims are equated to each other, but the forces and mights of Hamas and the Israeli state are equated. And the tendency to talk about the victims and like the humanities of victims, building hierarchies if from a pro-settler colonial Israel stance, that's all very much rooted in this Western liberal understanding of like talking about the value of human life from a very ahistorical perspective. But nobody is talking about the fact that Hamas is not the equal of the Israeli state. I mean, not nobody, of course, many people do, but it's rarely mentioned when problematizing this matter of how we can talk about different victims in this situation and war and ongoing genocide. I was wondering if you would like to say some things about the forces of Hamas and Israeli state and how that's perceived in Israel and in the Israeli left especially.
Okay.
Can we add one short question? She's
Okay.
got her hand up for some time.
Hi, thank you for coming and thank you for your remarks and thank you for everything else. But I'd like to go back to perhaps what you might have said if Saturday and subsequent events hadn't happened. You gave an illuminating but short description of the protest movement against the judicial overhaul. If we all have to double down on our own domestic environments, what's the wiggle room in Israeli society right now for
what?
The wiggle room, the margin of maneuver for people looking to protect a certain regime of rights, at least for Israelis, and room for.
Would you ask it if what is the future of the protest movement? If I could.
Well, or your assessment of it and its potential.
Okay. Now, two states, one state. First of all, I stopped using the word solution very long ago. I think it has been misleading us when we were talking about solutions, because first of all, you have to agree that there is a problem, and then you have to agree about the problem. So not everybody thinks that one thing this is the problem. So Palestinians would say the problem is settler colonialism or occupation. The Israeli right wing and even center, they say the problem is about Palestinian insistence to be free. So the problem is then to say the Palestinian problem hurts my ears, just like the Jewish problem, because what happens is that we tend to the problem was about anti-Semitism, and the problem is about Israeli occupation. But actually, we throw it on the subjugated itself, like the women's problem. It's not. There is a problem of sexism, not the problem of women. So I'm very cautious. Also, another reason why I'm cautious with the word solution is that there is nothing final in history. And when we talk about solution, it might be a good word for math formulas or chemistry. But in history, there is nothing final. And so the thing is how we can, and this is also one of I think, even though it was not formulated that way, I think this is also one of the things that characterize our activism. How can we impact the next phase, and to make sure that it is better than today's, and or that we stop the deterioration. So I cannot talk now about one state, because I think it's a huge leap to go to the one state. And as I said before, the settlements are not there in order to build a happy state for both peoples. So the problem are the settlements. I think that people gave up too early on the very clear demand to dismantle the settlements. I think we have to go back to it. I think that I don't care, 1 state, 2 states, 3 states, I don't care. You know, I'm in favor for the United Socialist States of the Middle East. But right now, I think that the demand or the pointing at settlements as a dangerous, murderous entity that created a very clear group of Israelis that are fascists. I mean, this is not all fascists are settlers. And probably not all settlers are fascists, but they are giving the fuel to the Israeli fascist movement, and they have become so strong, of course, because they are leaning on Israeli ancient roots of settler colonialism, for sure. But there were some points in life when it could have been checked. And the settlers made sure in a very meticulous planning way. They are amazing at planning to make sure that they get control of the rest of the land, and they do the same in the west, in Gaza, in the Galilee, and in the north, in the south, in the Negev. They are using same methods against Palestinians in these areas, directing budgets to Jews and not to, more than ever, to Jews and not to Palestinians, demolishing houses in Bedouin communities that they state. So there is correspondence between the methods in Israel proper against Palestinians who are citizens and with the Palestinians in the West Bank. So I think that activists here outside have to put the stress. I mean, this is Ku Klux Klan, you know, like think about the dangerous elements in American society against against the non-whites. This is where my imagination takes me. They are discredited. They're exposing their real function in the destruction of life of Palestinians and of establishing a messianic state is very important. And that's where it brings me now to the protest movement. We hoped that they would, you know, these links will be made. And indeed, people were appalled by the settlers' disregard of anybody else in the society. They started to see it, to connect. Of course, now with the attack and with the war that is going on now against Gaza, people are united, and that's also what we were. And I'm returning to the beginning of my talk. What we were also afraid about in the left, that all those protesters who also threatened not to go to the army when they are called, etc. When time comes, they will join. So now, I don't know how. I guess that many of the pilots who said that they would not go to service, and they go on missions, on military missions, also after they retire also after their recruitment age. I'm sure that they all go and participate in the bombing now. We haven't heard about anybody refusing. So again, the reform, the anti-reform, if we can, the anti-overhaul movement remains very, as I said, liberal, militaristic, and it doesn't make the connection. It doesn't see. It refuses to see the occupation. And we heard just about, there was a kind of discussion among leftists to what extent to go to the demonstrations. Because we all felt, like all these flags and all these slogans and all this general talking, we felt completely alienated from it. But there was, in all the demonstrations, every Saturday, there is a block of leftists, and it's called There is no democracy with occupation, and all kind of groups with different names, but all united around the issue of occupation or and also settler colonialism. I mean, these things were brought in apartheid. All these terms and all these things were brought up in the process of the demonstrations. The optimists saw, that the bloc is enlarging, or that people don't hit them anymore when they see. But I don't think it's such a comfort if you're not being beaten anymore, just because you have a flag or a banner with no democracy with occupation. And now, where am I? We have to finish, yeah. Okay, I think that, look, it's very interesting, your question about the economy of attitude to or how much the economy actually, you say, can overcome racism when needed. Well, of course, yes, of course, but I think that there are several forces here. So of course, as much as they can gain from Saudi Arabia or from Africa is fine, but it doesn't change the attitudes to Arabs here. It doesn't change the attitudes to an average Arab here or an African here. They can do things. The business separate racism in one channel and business in another.
Okay, please join me in thanking Amira for a wonderful talk.